So welcome everyone officially to Research Assignments, Identifying Unspoken Expectations. Sorry, he's being especially active today. I'm so glad to have you all here today. For those who don't know me, my name is Jane Hammonds. I am an assistant professor in the University Libraries at Ohio State. I'm a teaching and learning engagement librarian. So feel free to send me an email at hammonds.73@osu.edu if you do have any questions, comments. I'd love to talk more about information literacy. We're going to talk today a little bit about what research or inquiry-based assignments are, and then we're going to really focus on what are the hidden expectations or the hidden assumptions that we may be making as instructors, as librarians, that may be contributing to student learning bottlenecks related to information or related to research assignments. And then we'll share some strategies, some activities, some resources that will hopefully allow everyone to think through their expectations and their assumptions about research assignments, and also to help students identify what those are, to share those, to clarify our expectations when we are working with students. So we're going to start with an activity. We're going to use a Jamboard for this. So I'll share the link one more time in the chat. You should see a link there that says Jamboard, and we'll go out. And this will be a two-part activity. So the first one will have you think about what you consider to be the purpose of a research assignment. So when we give these research assignments, what are we expecting students to actually do? What are we expecting them to get out of them? What is the purpose of these assignments? And then I'm going to have you try to think back a little bit to maybe your own experience as a student, the students that you've worked with. How do you think they might describe the purpose of a research assignment? So we'll have you share both perspectives there using the Jamboard. I'm going to go ahead and go out to the Jamboard. Hopefully folks will be following me out there. If you're not seeing the Jamboard, do let me know. If you haven't used the Jamboard before, I think the easiest way to share a response is to go over here on the left-hand side, click the sticky note option, and that will allow you to post a sticky note sharing your response. But you can also type a text box in as well if that works for you as well. So I'll give folks a chance to share the responses here. So our first question is, how would you describe the purpose of a research assignment? We'll let everyone share some responses there. So some of the responses that we see coming in, and feel free again to continue adding yours. So we see to delve deeper into a particular topic, to develop skills in determining source validity, to utilize published information to expand a student's understanding of a subject, explore resources and synthesize information, to answer a question using the literature to deeply explore a topic, students engage deeply with a topic, to teach students how to enter the scholarly conversation, how to properly engage with sources. So you're seeing some themes coming in there, I think, about sort of deeply engaging with a topic, with a question, sort of entering that conversation related to that conversation, learning how to analyze information, how to synthesize information, right? To teach students how to research, let's see, to help students learn the role of research in their subject, the process to demonstrate growth and understanding of a subject, learn research skills, strategies, take notes, right? So we see a lot about, we want them to learn their skills that we want them to learn. We want them to have this critical approach to the information, how to find credible information. We want them to explore that, to synthesize, to analyze it, and then to engage with that information, right? To become part of that conversation on that topic. Great. Thank you so much for sharing your responses there. So same question again, and we'll ask you to think about this, from your perspective as a student, if what you can remember, or the students that you work with. How do you think a typical student might describe the purpose of a research assignment? And you can turn the page again up here by the top by using the little arrows. So we'll give everyone a chance to share their response, trying to think a little bit about this from the student perspective. Some of the responses coming in to ruin their lives. Yeah. Busy work, how to force them to learn how to use APA or MLA, to read a set number of articles, pursue an interest. Someone wrote overwhelming. So we have just a few more seconds if folks have any additional responses they wanted to share. So how to cite, how to not plagiarize, how to write in your discipline, to eat up their time. So I think that we're seeing, right, with the responses coming in, is that we feel that students may not have the same understanding of research assignments that we do. That they might find them to be overwhelming, or that they might find them, just something that they're being forced to do, something that is going to, take up a lot of their time. It's just going to be busy work. So we're seeing that, at least from our perspective, we think a lot of students may not really understand why we're wanting them to do these, or they may have, negative perceptions of what we're expecting, why we want them to do this. That's just something that we're going to force them to do. We had to do them, so you have to do them, right? So thank you all again for sharing your responses to the purpose of a research assignment. We'll go ahead and go back to our presentation. Hopefully folks are seeing the presentation. Again, if ever throughout the presentation I'm describing something that you're not seeing, please do just let me know. So here's how we think about research assignments within the teaching and learning department in the university libraries. We often actually use the term inquiry-based assignments instead of research assignments, because we want to get away from this idea that it's just like the typical research assignment is that traditional 10-page, 15-page end of term research paper that students write. We think of these as more broad than that kind of assignment. There's many different ways that a student could do a research assignment. There's many different forms that it could take. And it doesn't necessarily, excuse me, have to be a paper. So we use the term inquiry-based assignments to try to get at that idea. And we think about these assignments as those that require students to use various kinds of information, to ask questions, to make arguments, to propose interpretations or solutions. To do that, they have to evaluate and synthesize a lot of different information. They have to place that information or those sources within a particular field or discipline or conversation. And then we expect them to do something with that. So, share that new information, answer that question, encourage further inquiry, make their own interpretations, those kinds of things. So, a lot of different forms that these could take, and a lot of different ways that it might end up looking when we think about a research or inquiry-based assignment. I wanted to just stop really quickly to say if there anything that you would add to that list or anything that you disagree with in terms of what a research or inquiry-based assignment might be. If you do, feel free to go ahead and add your response into the chat. We'll just give a few seconds to see if anyone wants to share, and we'll move on. And also, if you have any questions at this point, please go ahead and share those as well in the chat. And the next part, we're going to think about research assignments as an academic practice. So I wanted to take a few minutes to highlight, why are we focusing on these types of assignments, research or inquiry-based assignments? They're very common in higher education. It's hard to think of a student who would be able to get through, college without having to do at least a few research assignments. Again, even if they're not that traditional paper, they're going to be using information in their classes to accomplish certain purposes, right? And these types of assignments can often really frequently act as stumbling blocks for students, and they can act as sources of frustration for instructors. Like there's some disconnect there. Why are we not getting this? Why are they not doing it? What is going on? And there's a lot of assumptions and expectations about these types of assignments that are often very broadly shared across, disciplines. So obviously there's going to be specifics about how researcher assignments are done in different fields that are going to be different. But there's a lot of shared assumptions as well and expectations about what these assignments might look like and what they're supposed to accomplish. So when we think about those shared expectations or assumptions, we think it's important to note, my colleague Amanda Folk talks a lot about this idea that, when students are entering higher education, they're entering a type of community of practice, right? That community has its own norms, its own values, its own expectations about what the appropriate types of behavior are supposed to be. And research assignments are part of that. They are situated within that particular context. And there are certain codes, certain expectations, certain values, certain assumptions that we make about what a research assignment looks like, what the purpose of those assignments are, that students may not necessarily know right off, but that are shared broadly across instructors. So you see a comment that we had coming in. Kate shared, providing exemplars and rubrics often helps students understand what's expected. Yes, absolutely, Kate. All right, so if we think about research assignments as part of this community of practice, that helps us to understand why instructors may sometimes struggle to design research assignments that are appropriate for a more novice learner, right? We have all been in part of higher education. We've got our, undergraduate degrees. Most of us have graduate degrees, multiple graduate degrees. We've been teaching or working in higher education. And so, we've absorbed those understandings and those expectations, and it can make us really challenging for us to see things from the perspective of a novice and recognize, something that seems perfectly common sense to us, perfectly, clearly understandable, and that obviously that this would include this or this should be part of this, may not be the same expectation for students who don't have that same experience. And so that's really what we're focusing on today, is really trying to highlight what some of those things are. So I wanted to just do another quick activity. We'll use the Jamboard again for this one, to just start thinking about what are some of those assumptions or expectations related to research assignments that are broadly shared across disciplines. And one very basic one, you must provide attribution for your sources, right? That's a basic expectation in research assignments across disciplines, that you have to provide attributions. So I'll go back out to the Jamboard and we'll give everyone a chance to share any additional ideas that they have about shared expectations or assumptions about research assignments across disciplines. And again, you should be able to switch the board there by clicking the little arrow, and we'll give everyone a chance to post their responses. All right, so some of the responses that we see coming in, I see some around credible and relevant sources. So this expectation that students will be able to recognize or understand the difference between different types of sources, such as the difference between primary or secondary sources, that they'll know what a reliable and credible source looks like, right? And that allows someone put peer-reviewed sources, right? So often that is the expectation that those are the specific types of sources that students are supposed to be using. Right. Another expectation someone had, used databases, right? So there's that expectation around where students are going to go to find the information sources that they need. Using multiple sources, that's a really important one, right? This idea that we don't want them to find just, here's the one article that I found and I'm going to use this and that's the only source that I found, right? how to read those sources, someone mentioned, right? And that's, not an easy skill, but we may expect that students will understand sort of the conventions of what an article looks like and how to effectively read those sources. The required number of sources is just a minimum, right? That you might find others as well. That it's not just about regurgitating others' information. Yes, that we want them to go beyond that, right? Knowing to cite the original authors of a concept, not a summary article or a news article. Yeah, so these are all really great. These are all things that, that we know about research papers or research assignments, that they're supposed to use multiple sources, that they're supposed to use certain types of sources generally to do that. That they are, know how to read and evaluate and identify what those sources are. We also have in there proper formatting, so we know what these look like, right? Revise writing and provide clear synthesis. Copying, pasting is not ethical. Yeah, so these are all things that we know about research assignments based on our experience in the field, our experience in our disciplines, working in higher education. But all of these things may not be things that students are coming in automatically knowing or understanding. Yeah, so great. Thank you all so much for sharing your responses there. We'll go ahead and go back to our presentation. I did just want to mention really quickly that when we think about research assignments, it's really important if we think about this, especially from the standpoint of equity or inclusion, that there are going to be differences in our students that are coming into our classes, coming into our libraries. Some students are going to have more academic cultural capital, right? Some students are going to come in already knowing some of these things. They've had to do research assignments in high school. They have parents that went to college. They have siblings that went to college, right? That can talk to them when they get their first assignment. They can take it to their parents and their parents will be able to give them some guidance. But other students are not going to have that, right? And those students that come from backgrounds that don't have that type of academic cultural capital may be perceived more as outsiders, right? There's something that they're missing, right? It's not really their fault. It's because, we are expecting them to live up to these expectations that we haven't always clarified to them, right? So I just wanted to mention that briefly, and then we'll pause here to see if there are any questions or comments before we jump into more specifically some of the hidden expectations that we might see. So Judy shared, my husband is a history prof and he has found that more students are copying and pasting since doing virtual school during COVID. Yes, that's really interesting to think about how we're going to have to think as students that have come through, high school in the COVID years, how they are going to adapt to expectations in college, I think is really an interesting question. Yeah. All right, so I wanted to highlight a few key expectations, assumptions that we might be making about research assignments. And to do this, I'm going to use a resource that some of you might know, those of you that are librarians might know, right? The Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education, but some of you might not be familiar with that. This is a document that tries to identify what are the core sort of shared understandings that most experienced researchers have about research that guide many of our expectations around research. So we're going to highlight 3 of those shared core concepts, and I think about how those play out when we think about our expectations for research assignments. Lots of discussion about ChatGPT happening recently. Yep, Kate, and we're actually having a library chat around ChatGPT coming up in February, so I can share the link to that with everyone in an email. So 3 of the key concepts that I wanted to highlight from the Framework for Information Literacy that I think really guide a lot of our expectations around research assignments are research as inquiry, scholarship as conversation, and authority as constructed and contextual. So the first one that I want to highlight is this concept of research as inquiry. And what this tries to do is highlight that experienced researchers tend to think of research as this process of inquiry, right? And we see and recognize that within our discipline or across discipline, there are questions, there are problems that are unanswered. And we see the goal of research and our own research as contributing to this collaborative effort across the discipline or between disciplines to address some of these questions or problems. So we think about research as this inquiry-driven process that is iterative, that is open-ended, that is very messy. We know that finding answers often leads to new questions, right? And so this perspective of research that many of us as more experienced researchers might share, may not be the same way that students approach research. So how does this play out in research? Right, research questions. This is one of the things that we often ask students to do. I think it's one of the hardest things that we ask students to do, because we come at it with this perspective of research as this ongoing inquiry-driven process, where students may be thinking about research as the goal of this is, right, to compile information about a topic, right? And we want them to think of questions, and we want them to answer those questions or provide at least an interpretation or an argument. And students may not have that perspective at all. And I think it's really hard, of course, when we think about even developing a research question that requires a lot of familiarity with the literature in your field or the literature related to the topic that they're studying to even identify what a good research question is. And so I think that we sometimes may not recognize how challenging it can be to develop a good research question when we are novices in a particular field. Another way that I think that this really plays out is this idea of being able to accept the ambiguity that the students are going to find in their results. We know that if we find one article, that's not the only article on this topic. Other people have their own perspectives. It's okay if the sources that we find don't all agree. But that can be really challenging for students who go in thinking about this. The goal of this is to find the right answer, all right, to find the one good, perfect source that's going to, cover this entire topic and answer the question that I have. And so students can get really frustrated when they find sources that don't match. So without that understanding of that perspective of research as this ongoing collaborative process where lots of people are involved, that can really make it challenging for students to understand and accept that ambiguity that they're going to find. So that's one of the key concepts that I wanted to highlight with this idea of research as this ongoing process of inquiry. Very closely connected to that, of course, is this idea of scholarship as this conversation, right? So recognizing that scholars are always talking to each other through their work, right? They're sharing new ideas, they're analyzing each other's work, they're debating, expanding, accepting, sometimes rejecting the work of others. And that, sources are like voices in this conversation, so that there's always going to be multiple competing voices within that conversation. This is, again, an understanding that we've developed as more experienced researchers. Even if we've not used the phrase scholarship as conversation, I think that this is something that should be recognizable to everyone who's been in higher education a while. I know when this, I first heard this term, I was like, wow, that says something that I understood implicitly without having the words to actually, say what that meant. So I was really happy when this first came out, and I was like, yes, that's what I, wanted to talk to students about. Students, again, may not have this understanding of this, ongoing conversation. And part of this, goes to this idea that we have, someone had shared this in the Jamboard, we want them to make an argument. We want them to share their own interpretation. We want them to do, analyze and synthesize so that they can do this, bring their own voice forward. And this is really, really challenging for students to do. I think it's really challenging for all of us in many ways, right? So identify that we have something that we can contribute to this conversation, that we are not only allowed to, but that we're expected to contribute our voice to this conversation and make that argument. And students may not recognize that as one of the really key components of most of the research assignments that they're going to be doing. And this is based very clearly on that idea of scholarship as an open, unended, ongoing conversation. Related to that, students often we do tell students that they need to use multiple sources, often, but not always. Do students really understand why? And this again goes back to this idea that each source is representing a different voice in that conversation. So that's why we want them to have multiple sources, and they can't just go with that one first article that they found and base everything that they had on that one article. Right. So scholarship as conversation, that's the second key concept that I wanted to highlight. And then the third one is this idea of authority as being constructed and contextual, right? So this is the shared understanding that information sources are going to have different levels of authority. There's a lot of things that goes into making certain sources considered to be more authoritative than others. And that context can determine which types of sources will be more appropriate than others. So I know someone to put in one of the jam boards, like using peer-reviewed sources is often an expectation. Right. And we know that because of our experience in higher education, we've seen the types of sources that are cited, that are always being cited. We know the expectations in our own field of what types of sources are going to be cited, but students may not be aware of those expectations. And a source that would be perfectly acceptable for them to use in another situation may not be acceptable for them to use in academic research. And so recognizing the types of sources that are going to be acceptable can be a real challenge. Right. And so that goes to this point here, right? The expectation is often going to be that students use scholarly sources, which is itself a problematic term, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And, the expectation that students are going to understand what we mean when we say scholarly sources. They're going to know what those sources are. They're going to know how to find those, and they're going to know how to read those and evaluate and use those. And they're going to know the situations when scholarly sources are not the most appropriate types of sources, because they're going to be in classes where that is going to be the case as well. And so that can be something that's really, really challenging. Okay. So I wanted to pause there to see if there are any questions or comments related to those three core concepts that I think really underlie a lot of our expectations. So research is inquiry, scholarship as conversation, and authority is constructed and contextual. All right, so a colleague in English once shared that she expected that only American grad students would ask, how many sources do you want? A question she thought was completely ridiculous. But I often have students ask me this. We train them to think of only sources as boxes to check off. Yes, right. Many of the instructions that we give are like, you have to have this many sources of this many kind, and students get used to that type of thinking. And we don't train them to think about sources in the way that we think about sources and use sources as scholars ourselves. Right, absolutely. And then Kate shared, we used to speak of gray literature. Often that's where the conversations occur. And that's a really great point, right? So, in different kinds of fields, there's going to be different expectations. In some fields, gray literature, would be the place that students are supposed to go. In some fields, it should be, the published scholarly literature. And other fields, students are not, they're not going to be going for those. They're going to be going for popular sources. And students have to understand that those expectations are going to be different depending on the field, the discipline, the course that they're in. Right. Great. Wonderful. So if you do have any other questions or comments, please go ahead and add those in. Just a few more things I wanted to highlight. This is just a quick activity just to get us thinking. For those of you that do research projects fairly regularly, how often do you start a completely new research project where you're not basing what you're doing on anything previously that you've done, but you're, completely new topic, completely new research question, completely new literature? How often do you do that as a researcher? So if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat, whether that's very often to almost never, you can go ahead and put your responses in the chat there. All right, so we see most of the responses coming in are C, on one that's D, one that's B, but yeah, it looks like the majority that we're seeing are coming in as C or B. So again, this is going to depend on your field, but for a lot of us, it's only going to be really occasionally, and sometimes almost never, that we're going to be starting something completely new. I know that my, research papers that I'm, when I'm working on an article, it's almost always based on something that I've previously already worked on. So I already have that level of built-in familiarity with the literature in the field, with, the key scholars in the field, the questions that folks have been asking in that field. But many times, when students are coming into this class, they're encountering, our discipline for the first time, and they're encountering the literature for the first time, the scholars for the first time. They're starting each time, a completely new research paper. And so they don't have that background to really draw on the way that we often do. So that's something that I wanted to highlight when we think about, how many classes students might be taking and the different courses, different disciplines that they might be engaging with in the same semester. A few other key things I wanted to highlight really quickly, just how challenging it is getting started with those research papers. So building on what I was just saying, a lot of us, this is a diagram of the research process that we shared in the libraries. A lot of us, when we start a research project, we're able to jump a lot of these steps, right? We can jump in to start finding stuff or even start evaluating stuff, right? Because we already know the background, we know the literature in our field. But students might be having to start every time they do back to this very beginning and going through this whole process again. So having that assumption that students are even going to know where to go to get started, what database to use, what types of sources are appropriate in this field, those kinds of things, it can be a lot for students. I also just wanted to highlight really quickly, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, the idea that we and our students have a shared language, and whether this is actually true, right? When we say journal or we say peer review or scholarly, do students think those things mean the same thing that we think those mean? Scholarly and academic are, for example, two terms that are often used interchangeably. Find academic articles, find scholarly articles. Are students going to know that those are the same thing? Do we always clarify what we mean when we say literature in the field or when we say peer review? Or journal, right? Journal has another ordinary meaning in the real world. And so our students are going to recognize the difference between a journal that's like a diary and a journal that is an academic journal. And there is some research out there that a lot of the terms that we use are ones that students really struggle to actually define. So this was just one study looking at one institution, which you can see that they found sizable chunks of students in their study who were unable to define key terms that we use when we talk about research papers or projects. So this is just something to really keep in mind and think about whether or not the expectation that we have about what these terms might mean is the same thing that the students actually have. So I just wanted to end this section with this quote really quickly. This is from Boston University, just to highlight again some of the assumptions or beliefs that we might be making about what students understand or what students already know coming into our classes when they're getting ready to start our research projects. So I just wanted to share that really quickly. And then we'll go ahead and move forward. We'll see again if there are any questions or comments. So Judy shared in EBSCO products, they have a checkbox for peer review, but their filters have a limiter for scholarly journals, right? But yeah, the language itself is not even consistent across a platform. And we know that even if they limit it to peer-reviewed articles, not everything is going to be a peer-reviewed article because they limit it to peer-reviewed journals and not peer-reviewed articles, right? So yeah, great. Any other questions or comments, please go ahead and share. And then for the last part, we'll talk about some teaching strategies and resources that hopefully should be helpful to you all in thinking about designing research assignments or helping students to interpret research assignments so that their understanding of your expectations is more clear. The first thing that I want to mention, for folks that are not familiar with it, I would recommend taking a look at the Transparency in Learning and Teaching, or TILT framework. This is a framework that was designed by Mary Ann Winklemas and some of her colleagues, and they've done a lot of research around this and found that students' performance on these types of assignments improve when instructors really highlight three key pieces in their assignment instructions. First, they tell students the purpose of the assignment. Right? So why are they actually completing that assignment? How is it connected to the goals of the course, to the goals of the program? What are students going to get out of that assignment? We saw in the Jamboard, folks said that they thought that students think that research assignments are busy work, or that they're, just something that we're requiring them to do to waste their time. They don't see the benefit of it. So very clearly explaining to students what they are going to get out of this assignment and why they are doing this. Second, task. So what do the students actually need to do? Where do they go to get started? What are the steps that you want them to take? What mistakes should they avoid? So giving them as much, as possible, those step-by-step guidance instructions to push them through that assignment so that they know what they're doing. And I'll mention here that sometimes folks say, well, part of the goal of the assignment is for them to figure that out on their own. And that's perfectly fine, and that's completely understandable. But if that is the case, letting students know that so that they don't think that they're the only one that doesn't get it. So just saying, one of the goals for this assignment is for you to be able to do this. You may find yourself feeling uncomfortable. You may find yourself feeling overwhelmed. You may struggle with this. That's okay. That's a normal part of this assignment. If students are aware of that and they know that they're not the only one that's struggling, that could help avoid some of the disconnect that students might feel and the challenges that students might have. And then the last one, and I think Kate had mentioned earlier, sharing like rubrics or evaluation criteria in some way, examples. So letting students know what good work looks like, letting students know what adequate work looks like, what work that's not so adequate looks like, and telling them really clearly what's going to be the most important part of this for determining your grade. And I'll mention, when we see assignment instruction like handouts, often things that are really highlighted are things like the font, the spacing, the number of sources. And so students really focus on those expectations because those are the things that are highlighted and the ones that they understand. But that may be a minor portion of the grade overall. So really thinking about the placements of that kind of information so that students can really see what is the thing that you are going to be focusing most on when you're grading their research assignments. Right. So again, if you're not familiar, Kate should purpose, what's in it for me? Yep. If you're not familiar with TILT, they have a lot of resources, and including a checklist for designing transparent assignments. I will share that with everyone in the follow-up email, but you can take a look at that, and it goes through and gives you some things to look at so you can say, did I clearly define these terms, those kinds of things with students. Another thing that you can do as an instructor, highly recommend, and this is based in the Decoding the Disciplines model, if folks are familiar with that, is find a colleague, if possible, and a colleague in another discipline, and have them review your assignments and provide feedback. If they're, would they know where to go to get started with this? Would they know what kinds of sources you really want them to use? What kinds of terms might be confusing to them? If your colleague is not able to really understand your assignment instructions, or there are things that they point out that may be problematic, those are going to be even more problematic for your students. So just, getting other eyes on your assignments. And this could also be a place where you could go to a librarian as well. It's going to depend on the librarians in your area or at your institution, but many librarians would be willing to do this kind of thing and look over these assignments to give you an idea of what might be problematic. So those two things are things that instructors can do before they give the assignments to students. Once you do give an assignment to students, an activity that I would recommend is one that we call interpreting a research assignment or parsing a research assignment. Basically, you give the students the assignment instructions, and then you give them a list of questions or tasks related to that assignment, those instructions. So you have them go in and say, underline any terms that you don't understand. Circle the part that you think is the most important, for determining your grade. Have them identify the steps that they would take to get started working on that assignment, and then have them share that feedback with you. And they could do this individually, they could do this in groups, but make it part of, every time you give a research assignment, give them that assignment where they actually go through the assignment and tell you what they think you want them to do. And that will give, you feedback of whether they're really understanding what it is that you want them to do or not. And Kate should for sure, librarians often get the questions from the students after they've been given the assignment, right? And that's a really great point, right? Librarians can be great resources to go for this because, we're often the ones that are getting the students that are confused, and we know what's confusing them about the assignments that are coming in. Absolutely. So interpreting a research assignment, this is an activity that I would recommend. Wouldn't take very long, but would give you some really great feedback on what students do or do not understand about your assignment. Similar to this, I recommend a lot of true-false activities. And I know this probably sounds kind of basic, right? But I've done these kinds of activities with many groups of students and with many groups of instructors, and it's really helpful for identifying what they think they know or they're not sure about related to various types of research assignments. So say one of your research assignments was an annotated bibliography. Give them 5 statements about annotated bibliographies. The purpose of an annotated bibliography is to do this. When you do an annotated bibliography, you're supposed to do this. Give them 5 true or false statements and have them just tell you which are true and which are false. And again, that will give you an idea of what they understand or don't understand about what this type of assignment is supposed to be, what it's supposed to look like, what they're actually supposed to do related to that assignment. Very similar to that, self-explaining activities. So if you want students to just tell you, here's the research assignment, step by step, how would you go about doing this? One of this key components of this assignment is for you to find 5 scholarly articles in the discipline. Have them tell you in verbally and writing how they would go about doing that, where they would go to get started, where they would look for those sources, how would they recognize what those sources are, right? And again, that gives you that feedback from those students to understand, they said that they would go to Google Scholar, but I really want them to go to this database, right? And so then you can clarify your expectations more with students after you see what they've already been thinking. And then the last one is just to do like a quick research check-in, several times throughout the project if you can. And we try to make this fun for students. So posting an image or a GIF that represents how they feel, how they're making progress. Excuse me. I could do a song title, a movie title, a book title, something like that. That just gives you that feedback of where they are in the process. If they are feeling overwhelmed, then you can stop and talk about what's causing you problems. What are you not, what are you having trouble with? So that you can just constantly get that feedback from students as you're going forward. So Chris said links are working on the last couple of slides, says access tonight. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. I will update all the links and make sure that those are all shared out with you in the follow-up email to everyone. So apologies for that. I wonder why they're not working. Anyway, yeah, I'll move ahead and go forward. So the last part here, I know we're coming up to the end. I did want to just share some resources that we have available. Excuse me 1 second. I'm always ready to start coughing as I'm talking. So we have on the Ohio State Library, or Ohio State University's Teaching and Learning Resource Center, a guide to designing research or inquiry-based assignments. So I'm going to go ahead and go. Let you all take a look at that one here. I had it already. Yeah, go back here for a sec. Apologies, as always. All right. So as you can see on this guide here, it takes you through a lot of the things that we've talked about all together. Where are some of the learning bottlenecks that students might have? What are some of the core assumptions that we might be making as instructors that may be contributing to those bottlenecks? And it takes you through this process of questioning, how can you question your assignments? How can you scaffold your assignments? Gives you some resources that you can use as you're going through that assignment design process. So that's one resource that I wanted to share with everyone. Also on the Teaching and Learning Resource Center is another guide on information literacy concepts and teaching strategies. So if you're interested in learning more about the core concepts that we talked about, like information, scholarship is conversation or research is inquiry, this guide has information on each of those concepts. It has resources. It has information on helping students understand expectations for research assignments. Sorry, 1 more second. So both of those resources are available freely on the Ohio State Teaching and Learning Resource Center site to help guide you through some of that research assignment design and checking your own assignments there. So those are 2 resources that I wanted to share. Another one that I wanted to share is a site that we have, Instructor Resources at University Libraries. This site here allows you to get information on a variety of different types of topics, including teaching, research, and information literacy. So it has a lot of guides and information on how to do things like research questions, types of information sources, source evaluations. For each one of these, there are readings, there are videos, there are sample activities and assignments that you can use and share with students. So we wanted to put together as much as possible sort of ready to share resources that any instructor can use and incorporate into their classes. I also wanted to highlight that we have available Carmen course modules. So if you're at Ohio State and you teach in Carmen, you have modules on different aspects of the research assignments that we've already created. So for example, we have a module on annotated bibliographies. We have one on literature reviews, using different search tools, citation tracing, evaluating sources, synthesizing sources. So all of those things that might be causing students trouble, we have these ready-made, built-in Carmen modules that you can download into your course and then modify as you would like and use and share with your students. So if you're interested in any of those, I encourage you to take a look. Go ahead and request a module. If you're not at Ohio State, you can request a module anyway. We can't give you the actual Carmen module because it's in Canvas, but we can give you a Word version of the module that you could take a look at and see if you wanted to share. So we see some folks in the chat. We'll pause here to see if there are any questions or comments. All right, great. Thank you, Chris. Let's see. Okay. All right, so those are the resources and strategies and some sample activities that I wanted to share. We've got a few minutes left in our workshop here. I would love to hear it if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat one step that you plan to take based on what we've talked about today. I would love to hear any of your responses to that question in the chat. So what you might be doing next based on what we talked about. And then I just wanted to share, we do have some references and resources. And I will be sharing a follow-up email with everyone that has links to the PowerPoint, make sure all of the links are working and all of the resources that we talked about today. All right, so I'll stop here. To see if there are questions, comments, or if anyone wants to share, one step that you plan to take based on the workshop today. So Tessa shared, I like the interpreting of research assignment activity. Yeah, and I think that's a really useful one. It's pretty simple. It's something that you can do really quickly, but could really give you a lot of good feedback on what students are not understanding. Kate shared sharing Tilt with other instructors as well as using it myself. Yep. We've redesigned all of our assignments based around Tilt, and I think it's been really helpful. So Christiane shared lots of looking through library resources as I redesign. Shared language idea is awesome. Yes, absolutely. Chris shared, I'm going to incorporate several things. I'm teaching an undergraduate honors research course this semester. Some of these check-ins for understanding will be very beneficial. Absolutely. Yes. Elizabeth shared incorporating the Carmen module and annotated bibliography into a class. Great. Wonderful. Thanks so much. All right, so we have a few minutes left if there are any additional questions, comments, thoughts. So Jared shared, I know it's basic, but I think just adding a definition section, defining terms, and letting students know that things like academic and scholarly mean the same thing would be super helpful. And that is so, I think that is really true. And Jared, we actually had a colleague of mine said, I got a call the other day from a student at the reference desk, and they said that they were looking for scholarly articles, but we only have academic articles. And what do I do? And that really, got to that point really clearly, that those definitions are things that we think that we understand and that we think that students understand without, without clarifying, are really things that they may not understand. And I think even just in our assignment instructions, just putting in parentheses, peer-reviewed article, just put a parentheses definition really quickly of what that looks like. That would be really helpful. Yeah. So I will, I'm going to stop sharing now, but I will stick around for a few more minutes in case folks have anything else that they would like to share. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Look for a follow-up email from me with more information. And I'll share again links to all of the resources and everything in that follow-up email, Judy. Yep. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Christiane. Thank you, Julie, Tessa, Jared. Thank you, Kate. Wonderful to see you all today. Hope everyone has a great day.